Welcome to the First Baptist on Fifth podcast. I'm Kyle Caudle, Associate Pastor for Youth, Missions, and Adults, and host of this special podcast series to help guide you through the season of Lent. I'll be interviewing folks from our church to discuss devotional practices for this season. Today, I'm joined by Olivia Blake. Olivia is a music enthusiast of all genres who first visited First on Fifth while a member of the Baptist Student Union at Wake Forest University. Olivia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
So is there a specific part of the season of Lent that you find meaningful?
I feel like the most meaningful part of the season is the, structured time for reflection, to sit in and think about what habits build our day, and how can we better align those to our faith.
That's great. Do you find that you naturally resonate with structure, or is that something you kind of resist?
Oh, I love structure.
Okay.
A very structured person that it's nice to have a season where you actually get to evaluate that structure. That because sometimes I think you get into routines that maybe don't best suit your interests.
So here's 40 intentional days
exactly
to
reset
focus.
That.
Yeah, that's good. So has your experience of Lent changed over the years, and did you grow up in a tradition that emphasized Lent?
Yeah. My childhood church definitely emphasized Lent. We did the whole Ash Wednesday service. But I think my perspective on it has changed. I think in past years, it's been focusing on worldly shifts to my routine, and just saying I'm doing it for Lent, but not really actually emphasizing the focus and recentering towards God, versus now the practices have become more spiritual in nature. So I think that's a shift for the better. But
yeah. So could you describe maybe what that looks like, an example? I know some people, they'll give up chocolate or, give up Netflix or something. Yeah. Do you like to think of it as giving up, or is it another practice you take on?
I do both.
Okay.
I give up one thing and add one thing each year. And the add has been more recent. But yeah, it was more of a giving up chocolate or giving up sweets, or adding in workouts or whatever else to my schedule that were more worldly and focused on me, and rather than God and doing good in the world. That those have shifted to being more of doing a walk where I'm listening to the word and being intentional in my focus on the word, or removing distractions. And this year it's been social media then I use that time I normally would click onto social media. My Instagram app on my phone has been replaced by my Bible app. So on that home bar, so anytime I accidentally click into it thinking I want to go to Instagram, then I'm forced into some Bible reading. Exactly. Yeah.
So you're the second person in our young adult class that shared that they've given up social media.
Yeah.
So I do hope that's been valuable. So was the adding the Bible app, was that part of the addition, or was there anything else that you added this season?
The other addition was the daily walks and trying to either do a spiritual-based podcast or Bible reading, and I kind of just pick and choose based off of what I was feeling each day.
So you do mention both in your bio and in the devotion that you wrote that you're a music enthusiast, and I said it right that time. And we'll talk about music a little more as it relates to your devotion, but I wondered, is there a specific music style or genre that you feel is most suitable for Lent?
I don't know if it's most suitable, but the music genre that I've been tapped into this Lenten season has been bluegrass and folky music, and very upbeat, which doesn't normally reflect the season. But I think that's also been, as I touch on in my devotional, part of that exploration to just find new music, find new sounds. So been tapping back into those roots that built my childhood. So
yeah, I love it. I had, in our conversation earlier, I had said I think blues really fits. There's a song I listen to every Good Friday. It's an old Blind Willie Johnson song, "Dark Was the Night, Cold Was the Ground."
Yes.
And it's just, it really captures the mood of Good Friday. Absolutely. So I love how music can do that. Well, we're going to move forward into the devotional segment of our conversation. I'll begin with a scripture reading, and this is the scripture that you wrote on, and then I'm going to invite you to read your devotion. So the scripture is from the Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 8 through 11. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am he." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And then I went and washed and received my sight."
And then devotional.
Yeah,
perfect.
go for it.
One of my New Year's resolutions this year has been to expand my repertoire of worship music. As much as there will always be a soft place in my heart for the Church Clap and Hillsongs United Zion album I grew up on, I knew, one, that with every passing year I felt more called to worship and praise through music, and two, that there are more artists with different sounds than the limited scope of my tween 2010s self could fathom. With this mission in mind, I've explored many new-to-me artists and begun hunting down a song for each week's Sunday school lesson I teach, whether similar in tone or directly related to our scripture for the week. I thought, why shouldn't this devotional be any different? So I found A Man Born Blind by Believe, lyricist Rachel Robles, and on the first listen, it brought me to tears. The lyrics, as well as her cadence and vocal emphasis, brought a whole new weight and perspective to this scripture that I hadn't considered the countless times I had read it before. In relation to these specific verses, she sings, "And the neighbors gathered round him, those who'd seen him begging blind, said, is this really the same man, or just somebody of his kind? But he said, I'm the one you knew, the one you passed each day, and someone called Jesus healed my eyes this way." And she closes the song singing, "One simple touch can open eyes, one quiet act can change a life. He once was blind, but now he sees. And though the healer moved on down the road, the world became a brighter place for the one who now walked home." These neighbors couldn't see past the label they had placed on this man. While sometimes attaching a label to oneself or others can help create a sense of understanding, identity, and purpose, oftentimes, as in these verses, they were used to separate, ostracize, and even create castes. They became so entrenched that we became blind to their very existence. But all it takes is one thought and one action. By washing away the labels we place on each human we encounter in our daily lives, we can begin to truly see the shared humanity within each and every one of us. By reaching across this manufactured divide, we are also reaching towards the gracious and loving one who always reaches for us.
Thank you. So you share that you've been seeking to expand your repertoire of worship music this year,
Yes.
and that's been a New Year's resolutions. Kind of what brought this on?
I don't really know what exactly. I guess I'd found one new artist towards the end of last year who was very mainstream but loved the music. And I was like, besides him and then my playlist I created on Spotify when I was a tween, I haven't really added to it since. And I've been more intentional about listening to worship music before heading into church. So as I get ready for church, that I was like, I feel like we can add on to this playlist. And then soon after, I also started teaching the Sunday school class, or leading my Sunday school class. That I said this would be a fun way to see, like, how can I find ways that the scripture connects to worship music. And it's kind of just run on from that. So it wasn't, I guess, an intentional resolution. It kind of just spurred about at the same time. So, but it's been fun to explore new artists and new songs. So.
Yeah. So your devotion was the only one to reference Church Clap, and that it is still alive and well at Passport Camps.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yes,
I'm sure.
So every summer, whenever they play that song, the place goes wild.
Oh, yeah, because
So,
I remember all the youth coming back even after I was a youth, and they still go crazy. And I'm like, that's true childhood right there.
Yes, that's right. So do you define worship music as something that happens in a church service, or does it go beyond that? And then maybe how has your taste changed?
Yeah. I would say definitely goes beyond, but does include what would happen in a church service. So hymnal music as well as praise band, and also even more secular artists that just touch on religious themes. So it's definitely expanded over time. But shockingly enough, most of my music taste before being more intentional was praise band. So it's actually been pulling in more hymnal songs. And so for the few people that sit near me in service, there's been many a times I've been taking a photo of the hymn we just finished singing so that I can go back and find it on YouTube and play it again. So that's why I'm pulling out my phone during service. But it's been mainly expanding that and also just exploring religious themes through more secular artists as well. So.
Yeah, so that reminded me. So one time, this was years ago when I was first in youth ministry, and we had a youth praise band, but we played Come Thou Fount. And they're like, I want to play that new song, Come Thou Fount. And they're like, this is actually like a really old hymn.
Yeah.
Is it like that for you? Like you're encountering new things?
Yeah, for sure. Because even I think one of my favorites at the moment is A Closer Walk with Thee, but it's by a newer artist who's just done their own rendition. But the twang in the voice, it gives a new feel to the song for sure. So definitely a lot of those, it's just new covers of older songs. But finding that, because I feel like sometimes the tone of the music shifts with the change in genre.
That's right.
So finding that and exploring that.
Yeah. That's really good. So in this text from John 9, which when we're recording this was last Sunday, we focused on this in worship. Very long text. It's like 41 verses.
Oh, yeah.
So we read the whole thing, and you just take a section of it. But it's about this encounter of a man born blind who Jesus heals. And this healing generates some pretty strong emotions. So you have some people doubt, and I think your text references that. So some people believe, some doubt. They have all these questions, and then other parts in the scripture, like the Pharisees, they're like, "You should not have healed on the Sabbath. You can't do that." Did you connect with this scripture? Or was this like a scripture that was easy for you to connect with?
Yeah. For sure. This is obviously a story I've heard many times before. But it was hard when doing this devotional to focus specifically on 3 verses, because it's easy to pull in other parts of the story, but also knowing Mary Kaler had the devotion the day before, which is the first 7 verses. So having to make sure I'm sticking to the verses I was assigned with it was hard, but also created a new focus for the scripture, because sometimes these verses can get lost when then focusing in on the Pharisees that come later. But it was fun to create that emphasis. And then for Sunday school, we do a liturgical focused Sunday lesson that then expanding it again to see the story as a whole was an interesting nuance.
Did you guys use the faith element?
Yeah,
we did.
So
the youth used their version of that too. And so we were all tracking on the same text. So it's interesting that we're kind of all on the same page there. So you point out, I think, and this text points out that seeing is not always about physical sight. So obviously there's a man born blind who is healed, but there's a lot of other people in the story who don't see, or don't see him, for who he is. And then I think you talk about how it's about how we choose to see or ignore, and labels can be both a good thing and a bad thing.
Absolutely.
So talk a little bit about ways that we label in non-helpful ways, and then maybe some helpful ways that we can label.
Yeah. I'm going to start with helpful. And I think many times it's when we self-identify with a label, those tend to be more helpful. And or when it's a quick providing an introduction of yourself or another, it gives context to a person when people are first meeting or first getting to know each other in a situation outside of the assigned context. So sharing someone's career or like where they grew up can all shed light on who that person is. But at the same time, oftentimes those labels that are used to provide context or unite and show that, oh, we're part of a shared group. We're both believers. We're both students. Like any assigned label can often also be used as a negative, and that really depends on who's assigning it, and also the context of the adjective or noun that's being used, that then some of those things get flipped on their head, and it's then perceived in a negative light. It's that person's from there, and it's just, I guess, how things are presented that labels can be bad, but also sometimes it's used as we're this, but you're different because of why. And so focusing in on the differences that divide us rather than the things that unite us and the common ground we have is where they can go good to bad or bad to good.
Yeah. one of the interesting kind of interpretation choice is that, some people would have years ago called this the blind man, but our version says the man born blind, which is probably more accurate because that's part of his story, but that doesn't capture his whole identity.
Exactly.
And I think that's a way of a label can, just based on where it's placed and the emphasis, it can really shape
Absolutely.
things.
That's even one thing in my time in healthcare, in working in healthcare, is the putting the diagnosis after the person. It's a patient with blank rather than focusing in on their diagnosis and reminding people of that humanity. But that small shift when introducing a patient, when doing when doing a handoff, is a very big thing that means a lot to the individual, but no one really thinks of. But yeah.
Yeah, you were not just your diagnosis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. So Jesus doesn't really seem to be so beholden to labels. What did you find about how Jesus interacts in this story?
Yeah. I think first off, like, Jesus is, as much as he recognizes and understands the nuances of labels, a lot of, at least in my interpretation of the word, is going through with like a blindness to the labels that have been placed on people, because recognizing that most of them being placed have been from others rather than a self-identified, and or it's labels based on circumstance rather than innate to the human themselves. So I think it's wonderful that, he approaches him like any other human being, rather than as truly like a beggar or someone that should be like talked to at a distance. He gets right in there and, touches his eyes. So I think that's very interesting and something we could work on as society today. But he also does recognize the labels and the roles they play, and actively tries to like turn them on their head in many cases, and also honors them in other regards where it's important to respect the labels that come with honor and things like that. So
it's interesting how these texts in John the past few weeks have really been about how Jesus is kind of this border crosser, or he's not like, all the boundaries they're kind of, you're a science person, right? Like semi-permeable.
Yeah,
It's like this kind of, he crosses these edges that are supposed to be really hard and fast. Like you think about the Samaritan woman that he encounters at the well, and that would have crossed a lot of boundaries, whether it's gender, ethnicity. And Jesus still has this encounter with the person. So
that's definitely a good point. I even think so many things that we think are a permanent barrier are truly semi-permeable. That, that reminder from just him going through his life is a great reminder for us today.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not saying the label or the boundary doesn't matter. But it's like, that's not the whole story.
Absolutely.
So one of the things we've been doing with the Lenten series, and as I've been editing and put them together, there's a section called Recenter, and it's like an invitation to, it could be to prayer. Like yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, so the devotion that day included the breastplate prayer of St. Patrick. And that was kind of the recenter, just an invitation to pray. Some have been, hey, take 5 minutes of silence. Others have been, go take a walk. And I've kind of paired a verb with this to invite us to expand kind of how we enact our faith. And so some of these words have been things like imagine or ponder or rest. These kind of invitations, and you chose your own verbs there, and I love these. And so could you share the verbs that you chose and what the meaning behind those?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two verbs were shed and don, and I guess the shed came from the idea of like the shedding the labels and removing those, because that's what I touched on during my devotional. So that one came a bit easier, but then I also wanted to remember, as much as we're taking away and stripping things that we've been like encouraged or subconsciously been adding to our encounters with others in our day-to-day lives, there's also an intentionality of an added behavior. And I think that even goes back to my Lenten practice of removing something and adding something, that I thought it was important to have too. But I wanted to be intentional with that second verb of, it's something we can put on and make malleable, just like a piece of clothing you don a jacket, rather than it being something that's structured and unmoving or unflexible to the world and context. Because I think that's the important piece, is that semi-permeableness of these labels that either remove if it's coming from a place of hatred or divisiveness, but also recognizing like there is a reason we have them, and trying to, I guess, work in the world we live in rather than completely dismantle systems that you as an individual probably can't.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there was and I don't know if you've read the book by Lauren Winner called Wearing God. And it was this, it took all these images from scripture, how clothing can be ways of experiencing faith.
Wow.
And so I do recommend that both to you and anyone listening. But like there's like phrases like the clothes make the person or something like that. So, and certain clothes make you feel a certain way, and they're not permanent, like there's certain contexts, like you may wear your Sunday best to church, but you may not, and then there's you wear a uniform for this sport or this thing. And I like that kind of image that you bring up there about, this is something you need to take off. This is something you need to put on. Yeah. And those may not be permanent. Like you may need to shed your anxiety and fear, but there may be at some other point in life where that can be an important part of your faith by experiencing and living into that in its fullness. But thanks for bringing that insight to us about shedding and donning during Lent. I want to thank you for joining us on the First on Fifth podcast. Thank you, Olivia, for being our guest and for writing devotions. If you would like to find our devotions, you can find that on firstonfifth.org, as well as our church newsletter. Thank you for following, and be well.